Coming to you from our opulent and luxurious 4x8 refurbished room closet at the national headquarters in Indianapolis. With duct tape studio lights and a mic that you barely can hear, we hope to entertain and educate you. This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Hello, and welcome back to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. I can assure you that for myself, Ashley, and Jeff, this has been the longest recording session of all time because we've been on a 3-hour tactical pause for technological issues. It has been every bit as spectacular as you would imagine. Mr. Daly had said it's too bad we weren't recording for a special behind-the-scenes edition of the podcast that could be available on DVD. It was special, and Mr. Stoffer here, who will be joining us in a moment, was commenting that we're already 40 minutes past zero beer 30. So things have not gone our way, but hopefully we are good to go now. I'm Mark Seavey, your host. I am the Special Projects Counsel for the American Legion. I'm joined, as always, by Jeff Daly and his absolutely phenomenal setup that he's got going on here with his U.S. Marine Corps football. He's got a new camera. It looks great. You look spectacular.
You know what they missed in the behind the scenes is my stand-in. I have a crew. I had a stand-in. It was a broom so that we could focus on this. And the weird thing is the camera's not new. It's like a year and a half old. I just am slow to integrate technology.
The whole setup for this show has been a debacle. But Ashley has maintained her smile throughout, and we can see her doggies they've given up waiting for the show to start. So they are peacefully sleeping in the background. But without further ado, we are going to be joined in a few moments by my friend Jeff Stoffer. He was my boss here for 12 years at the American Legion, and he was kind of my only friend when I came to Indiana. And one of the first, he was the only one who showed me any kindness. He and super producer Holly took me out to golf my first weekend here, and we had a couple of adult beverages on the front nine. And by the back nine, I specifically remember one hole, and I think it was the 13th. Holly was on the 16th shot of that one hole, 16th shot, and she had not yet reached the green. So that was when that ended. So we will be joined by Mr. Stoffer, and I'm very eager to have him on here. We're going to talk about some of the things the Legion has done over the past century and what we're going to do in this century to come. But first, let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with you. The
restaurant industry is a great place to pursue your passion while building a career at the same time. If you like to cook, enjoy being part of a team, and show off your skills, sign up today for Restaurants Recruit. Restaurants Recruit will directly connect you to restaurant companies looking to hire great military talent and willing to invest in your career. Sign up if you're a veteran, a military spouse, or are getting ready to transition out of the service and are ready for your next big move. It's free and easy. Just go to chooserestaurants.org/restaurantsrecruit to get started on a future in restaurants.
All right, we are joined by Jeff Stoffer. He is the editor of the American Legion magazine, and even though, as I said, he is my friend, we're going to hit him with some hard-hitting questions. I'm not going to go first, Jeff, but I will tell you that mine is going to deal with my evaluation from 5 years ago when you did not give me an exceeds expectation. And I also want a specific answer as to why, when you came to my house for the Super Bowl, the Patriots versus the Seahawks, and the Patriots were clearly going to go down in defeat because Pete Carroll wouldn't be stupid enough to throw it with 3 seconds to go in the game or whatever, why you continued to stay in my house when it was obvious I was about to break down in tears and vomit on the ground. But we'll get to that one in a minute. We're going to start off today with Miss Ashley Maldonado, who is going to ask the first question of Jeff. So, Ashley, all yours.
Well, thank you for that marvelous introduction. So, Jeff, thanks so much for being here. We know you're such a busy guy. Once in a while, in the background, we'll see him come in and bring Miss Holly some food. So, Jeff is fabulous. So, I'll kick off the first question. So Jeff is a big history buff for all the listeners out there, and my first brain buster for Jeff is, as we discussed, American Legion history, and, we have a headquarters in D.C., and I wanted to kind of hear your take on some of the highlights from a historical perspective here in Washington, D.C. in relation to the American Legion.
General highlights or specific ones? I can go through a few of them. I'll tell you.
You got three.
Three. Okay. All right. I'll throw one at you. One of the things, and this came back to the very first year. We're here talking about the American Legion birthday. I think that's kind of our window. We're kind of like celebrating. It would be our 102nd year of existence, and it was in 1919, that very first year, very famously, when the first American Legion kind of VA&R team, if you will, gathered in Washington, and they went to Congress, and they were really upset because all these combat veterans were at Walter Reed from World War I, and they were just getting their regular pay, even though that they were disabled, like with amputations and blindness and with severe life-changing disabilities. They had no combat disability program. They had very little going on in terms of real benefits. And the national commander and our VA&R team did what they started to do very well at that time. We did this a lot in the future. But in December of 1919, they went to the Hill, and they brought with them a whole bunch, like 30 or 40 severely disabled World War I veterans who were at Walter Reed with them, and just basically brought them along to dinner. The House and Senate wanted to know who was this brand new American Legion that had just come on the scene. And they said, let's go to dinner. They said, great, we're going to bring some of our friends. And they did. And by the end of December, they were able to get, I think, a $50 per month increase in their disability pay. I mean, it was almost nothing to begin with. But they got disability pay. They got disability compensation. And that was really the roots of disability compensation for combat veterans. That happened in D.C. in December of 1919. And it was the beginning. It kind of laid the groundwork for a number of major things the American Legion did over the next century. That was my number one.
What's number two?
Well, I think you just have to go. I think for pure impact, that was the earliest, but for pure impact, you got to go to the night of June 10th, 1944, when the American Legion, along with the VFW, by that time the American Legion and the VFW had reconciled their differences on the GI Bill and worked together to rush Congressman John Gibson out of the hills of Georgia in the middle of the night through a storm with a police escort and an army escort, if you can believe it, from out of the hills of Georgia down to Jacksonville, Florida, to catch a plane that Eddie Rickenbacker had supposedly set up for him. Flew him into Washington. He arrived at 6:30 in the morning to cast the swing vote, where the GI Bill was hung up in a conference committee on a 3-3 tie, and Gibson went in and he said, and it was on racist basis. They did not want African American World War II soldiers to get the exact same kind of benefits as white veterans of World War II. The American Legion was inviolate about this position. Very important role that they played. Brought them back to. Let me start this over. Honestly, what happened was that Gibson got flown in. He arrives at 6:30 in the morning. He announces immediately upon landing that he is going to have a press conference to reveal who voted against this and why, if they didn't vote for it, and got a unanimous vote, and it broke it out of conference committee. It was the last day, or the GI Bill would have died in committee, and that was on June 10th, 1944. And they got a hold of a dispatcher the night before on June 9th, and her husband had just come ashore at Normandy earlier that week, and she said, "I'll do what I can to get a hold of this congressman." Quite a story.
Wow.
there are just a number of different things that the American Legion was able to get accomplished, but another major one in Washington, I think, has to be the American Legion's support for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, when other groups and organizations were really negative about it, didn't like the design. Maya Lin's design from had won the contest in a couple of blind jury competitions, and yet there was a big uprising that it wasn't the bold enough, victorious enough. It looked kind of like a big grave, or it looked like something that people weren't used to. And then the American Legion stood by the decision of the judges, stood by the program, stood by Maya Lin, and gave her security and support throughout the big Veterans Memorial dedication ceremony, and it was controversial. And at that time, because they wanted, there were a lot of people in Congress who wanted a different kind of monument to the Vietnam veteran, and that Veterans Memorial is the most visited Veterans Memorial in America right now.
Wow.
I don't think the somber nature of the memorial detracts at all. I think it makes it special. There's nothing as special as visiting the Vietnam Wall.
Well, every name on there is a monument to that person and that person's life, and it really draws the families there. And I mean, some of the most compelling art in honor and remembrance revolves around that wall. Look at photographs and paintings, and I still am in awe every time I go and see it.
Right.
All right, Mr. Daly, you are up.
All right. I am going to. First, I want to say that story about grabbing the guy from the hills and getting him into Washington to get it out of committee in the last day, that should be a documentary or a movie. It sounds like that exciting. And speaking of documentaries, my question is about To Strengthen a Nation. And it's funny, I'm talking about movies, and I'm from Hollywood Post 43, and your hosts for that are also from Hollywood Post 43, Jarek and Lorna, and that it's so well done. And what would you say was the significance and the importance of that, and especially when it was done, and how it leads us into the next 100 years?
Boy, that's really, you said it there. We wanted to develop a documentary series that didn't just recount chronologically our history, but to talk about what this preamble means, what each of these pillars mean, what everything, and where it began, what were the roots of it, and how when you can go to Plattsburgh, New York, on the northern border, nearly to Canada, and you can go to Los Angeles, California, and walk into those American Legion posts, and you sense the same sort of value system and identity regardless where you're at. And so lo and behold, we went with Jarek and Lorna to Plattsburgh, New York, and I know Mark Seavey knows why Plattsburgh, New York, but a lot of people don't. Plattsburgh, New York was the location of a civilian volunteer military training camp that was set up by former President Theodore Roosevelt and General Leonard Wood to train civilians who were volunteers to serve in the military if we should have to go enter World War I. At that time, we were very much isolationist and very much pacifist by government decree. And Roosevelt thought, this is going to get us into trouble because we won't have trained officers, we won't have trained soldiers, and we really didn't. But the few who we did was this training camp group who evolved into what became American Legion Incorporated, which predated the American Legion as an organization. And they were based in New York. And it's funny, there's a lot of things that we picked up from American Legion Incorporated, like some of the imagery on our cards, on the original membership cards. And then we had a membership processing system that the American Legion was immediately able to get, and staff to do it, who'd worked for American Legion Incorporated, who made that seamless transition to process membership in May of 1919. So in New York, we were able to process all these memberships. I think they got 685,000 members in their first year, which was a lot at that time to handle. and we picked up a lot of the processes from American Legion Incorporated. Excuse me.
So that's a sounds again like another movie in and of itself. But if and I know that we're going to put the link into the show notes. But what would you say, like, because I know not everyone has seen it, and because I put it in our post newsletter, so a lot of people in my post have seen it. But why would it be so important for Legionnaires to see this and people who just want to understand this organization?
Really, the thing about it is what we tried to create, instead of one great big honkin', 2-hour documentary movie, we tried to put together a set of digestible episodes so you didn't have to watch it all in one sitting and because it's a lot to absorb. And so the Prelude is a setup, and it talks about, and I think it's really important that veterans and Legionnaires, members of the VSO community, understand that prior to the American Legion, government and public support for veterans was very weak, and it was fractured, and it had become politicized. A lot of the groups that predated the American Legion were partisan and fell into partisan traps, and they fell into ideological positions. So the American Legion learned a lot from those previous patriotic and veterans groups of previous generations that had been going on since the Society of the Cincinnatis after the Revolution, but that was officer only. The American Legion made a point saying, we're going to have enlisted people in our national club, and that was kind of a breakthrough. And I defined a lot of things. Why do I think it's important? So the Prelude sets up that there really wasn't a great support group for veterans in the nation prior to 1919 and the origins of the American Legion. And then we try to make the case in the statement in that first episode 1, the formation, about if there were no other episode to watch, just watch episode 1, the formation of the American Legion, because it sort of tells the whole story and winds up with I think a really good rendition of the preamble done on video. But it tells kind of it's an introduction summary video, and then all of the rest of them are smaller, bite-sized, 10 minutes and less documentary videos on different features of the organization, national security, American Legion baseball. I brought with me the cap from Millbank, South Dakota, which is the birthplace of American Legion baseball. We did a shoot up there, met with the folks in Millbank. Very proud community of the fact that they put a big sign on the front when you drive into Millbank, South Dakota. We are the birthplace of American Legion baseball, and I mean, it's a thing. And the Legionnaires there were really, really great with us, and very proud of that place in their history. Where does our children and youth program come from? We explore the roots of that in one episode. We talk about how the concept of Americanism came about and what it meant. And there's a lot of different interpretations about what that means. It's not like Americanism was meant by the World War I people, especially. It wasn't there were a lot of issues with those World War I troops who went to fight. They weren't physically fit. Many were illiterate. Many didn't speak English as a first language or at all. Their training was poor. So all of these programs, Americanism, children were poorly treated. Orphans, children were running the streets. It was a kind of a rough time for children. And the American Legion felt it was their responsibility to sort of cultivate a new generation of young people who understood the nature of America. We did have a flag code. Yeah, the flag meant a lot different back then. So all of these things were sort of pieces of the puzzle that the American Legion put together to form a sense of pride in nation, understanding of what you're fighting for. Because these guys not only didn't speak English and may have come from Germany when they were fighting in World War I and didn't even speak good English and spoke German as a first language. What am I fighting for again? They didn't understand. The American Legion published 2 volumes of civics textbooks that went to thousands of schools in the 1920s just to try to solve this problem. Very interesting. So I always relate to the fact that our deficiencies in World War I laid the groundwork for the work that the American Legion sought to accomplish in that first decade, especially. And that's what and I think we try to keep tying it back to that to strengthen a nation.
Wow.
Through that.
Well, thanks for that. And I will say that it's 100% Jeff Daly recommended. If anybody cares about my recommendation, I'm not Ebert or Siskel, but I really enjoy that, and I'm not just saying that so Jarek and Lorna will buy me beer when we reopen our post. Not just saying it, but I wouldn't refuse it.
I was on that trip to Plattsburgh, one of the more enjoyable trips I've taken, and I don't know if you remember this, Jeff, but our plane got so delayed we landed in Albany, New York at 1 o'clock in the morning, and we still had a 4-hour drive up to Plattsburgh, and the Department of New York completely squared us away and got us hotel rooms in Albany. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't think we would have made it. It was like snowstorming, and there was like wind on these passes, and everyone was exhausted. So shout out Department of New York. Ashley, your dogs are totally stealing the show right now. They're wandering around back there. It's awesome. So Jeff, my actual question, first of all, the room you're recording this in looks somehow familiar to me. And when I come back to that room, I hope not to find the Vikings hat that I did purchase you in Cabo San Lucas. So, but you can take that with you when you leave. But my question actually it deals with how the American Legion, back when we were founded, you talked about how the membership grew exponentially in that first. And clearly we weren't in a time where you were sending out mass emails or purchasing television or anything else. So clearly it was word of mouth. But on the other side of that, when they had annual conventions, national conventions, they were rowdy. It was exactly what you would expect from Joes who just came home from war. And I know if you could talk a little bit about a delegation from Tennessee and the issue they may or may not have had at one point, but with Alvin York. But the thing is, like, it's interesting to me how when we found it, it was all word of mouth. It was all community based and everything. There wasn't a national thing. But when they got together for the national convention, it was quite a show. But can you talk about that dichotomy and some of the things that happened at those conventions?
The early conventions were insane. There's a reason we don't have conventions, I think, in Kansas City anymore since 1922, I think, when they and this is in the height of Prohibition, and the American Legion. I mean, thousands. We had the Allied generals of World War I, Ferdinand Foch and Diaz and some of the others were there with Pershing and the American Legion at our national convention. I think it was 1921. And it was a swarm, and there was no controlling them. There was one story about a group from that parade that marched right into, I think it was the Kansas City Star office, and they marched into the office and got up on desks. And it was a crazy story. But you talked about Tennessee. That was in Minneapolis, and the Tennessee delegation disappeared altogether. Nobody knew exactly where they went. They didn't go to the rooms that they were supposed to be in. They did show up at the parade, but I think that they just kind of like faded into the ether. There was also this there was a car that was like thrown into the river, and then somebody thought, well, that's bad, we've got to pull it out. So they ended up pulling it out. It was nuts. But by 1937-38, I think it was, Harry Kalmary's here as national commander in New York City. That national convention parade went 23 hours, I believe, and it was broadcast live on NBC radio, and there were people throughout the city lining the streets. So it was it was early. That was an early, when the American Legion National Convention Parade was a huge national event. Early on, we had, Sergeant Stubby, who Mark knows, for several years. He was the only canine legionnaire, official canine American Legion member. Had a vest, had his pin, membership button, and he was a national figure. Sergeant Stubby was known, and he was a touring dog who had served in theater during World War I, and Sergeant Stubby was a big part of the convention parade. It was just such a completely different milieu. You know, back then, a parade like that was a big, entertaining phenomenon for people who didn't have television, the internet, radio, really much radio, no radio early, and then later some radio, and then they broadcast it on radio, and people still went to it. They thought it was the greatest thing. So, and it was quite the pageant. So.
I mean, I still, you know me, you and I have spent a few parades together ourselves. I remember one in Milwaukee that I'll never remember or forget, that we had a good time from what I understand. And that's happened here in Indianapolis, I think it was 3 years ago. Another fairly good time that I'll never remember or forget. I mean, I think our convention's great. I love going to the parades. I don't think there's going to be a parade in Phoenix because it'll be, 117 degrees in the shade, and but I've always loved the stories about our national convention. I know when I was in law school, there was one of the cases we studied was a Legionnaire brought a alligator on a dog leash into a hotel to celebrate the American Legion convention, and the alligator went nuts and broke down a bunch of stairs, hit a bunch of people, and they were injured. And the question in the case was the American Legion national headquarters liable for the actions of this alligator, or should somebody have stepped in? That's the kind of wild stuff that it's like, I mean, I've seen at our end when we came home from Afghanistan, there were many stories like that things that were happening that were pretty wild. So, all right, we're going to take... Yeah.
Hold on. Before we go, this happens, I hear with Jeff Stoffer's around, people get to be today years old and they learn something. Now, we played the sergeant, we had a red carpet event for the animated Stubby movie. And
Hey, sweetheart.
I'm today years old when I realized that was a real dog and a real story.
Yeah,
and
my
I didn't know
headphones
that was
died,
real.
and
Yeah.
I'm on.
I just had zero idea. So, yep, I'm today years old, and thank you, Mr. Stoffer, for that.
Yeah, Stubby
All
was
Why,
famous.
He was. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with you in 30 seconds.
Did you know that you could cut a 5-pointed star in one snip? Betsy Ross did. Learn her secret and many other things you might not know about Old Glory in the American Legion's bookazine, Indivisible, the Story of Our Flag. Available at legion.org/emblem sales.
All right, we're joined again by Jeff Stoffer. We're talking about the centennial of the American Legion and the American Legion birthday coming up here. We'll have our 102nd. We don't look a day over 101, do we, Jeff?
Not at all.
And we'll go to round 2 of our questioning. We'll start with Miss Gorbolja Maldonado.
All right. So, Jeff, you have told us all of these fun, tabulous stories about all the shenanigans and all of the forthright, amazing things that the American Legion has done and continues to do. So, my question is for you, where do you see us in the next 100 years, right? Like, we're already continuing to forge our own path, but where do you see the American Legion moving forward?
I think, for my money, I think that we are coming out of, obviously, one of the darkest years in the history of America. I mean, this has been a really tough year, and this I've chronicled, and I've really made a point to really capture this in this COVID operations book that's coming out this month. The story of the way the American Legion organically and in heart and soul and passion went to work in every community, every state, and across the nation to provide COVID-19 relief and support is absolutely crazy. I've got, there's the book right there. The book is called COVID Operations, and it goes on, it's on press now. We have some preliminary copies. But out of this, the things that occurred at the local level, you wouldn't believe the tons of food. American Legion posts and American Legion members collected, distributed, raised the money, delivered to healthcare providers, first responders, hungry, self-isolating veterans, children, students, parents who didn't, who basically had their kids at home for the first time and didn't really know the schools were providing nutritious meals for them at school. But now all of a sudden you've got 3 meals a day and those kids are home and I'm home and I'm trying to work, and it's a changed paradigm. American Legion just really nationwide, it's absolutely mind-boggling how much delivery of food occurred, and it continues to do so. I think that the wave of PPE, the face masks that the American Legion was able to either obtain through their means, through the American Legion's means, if they had to hand sew masks and deliver them, they did so in the thousands. One guy that we had a story in this thing, one of the posts had a thought on a Friday afternoon, and he says, I'm going to put this up on Facebook. We know that the healthcare people are short of face masks. I know carpenters and I know welders and I know people, they've got those face masks. They do an all call. The next morning, they have hundreds of carpenters, welders, plumbers, people who work around fumes, came in and donated their face masks for the healthcare workers. The nurses all came in that morning, and they said, how did you come up with this? We're short at the clinic or the hospital. So we got our connections. They called on their members who were in these industries, who simply said, take ours, you go take ours. And that is a little act of kindness. I think of Lowville, New York, when the long haul truck drivers were unable to stop and eat at restaurants or even go into rest areas to eat something that they had or to stop and eat. Lowville, New York, American Legion posts set up a stand on the side of the road and made hamburgers and hot dogs and made lunches for these long haul truck drivers to pull over alongside the freeway and eat and get something to eat so that they could deliver their goods. That was a big problem in March of 2020 and April. Blood drives. We had a record year for blood donations, and it was because generally the American Legion historically, if you want to go back to 1942 when the American Legion's blood donor program began, and it was to get the blood put together, the plasma to support the military, but moreover it was because the blood that we had and would normally collect was going into the military. We were short at home. So the American Legion stepped in and built its blood donor program and became, over the years, the Red Cross's leading donor of blood of any organization. And we had a big spike, obviously, in 2020 because we had a nationwide call. Red Cross needs blood. Ohio had like 39 blood drives. It was an amazing experience. Post 43 had a great blood drive in Hollywood. At North Carolina, there's one town in North Carolina really put together a fantastic one. But all of these things, all of these folks, and they had to sanitize. One post absolutely had to replace. They replaced all of their ceiling tiles and repainted their post, sanitized everything, so the people who went in to give blood knew that they were coming into a safe environment. The Red Cross was blown away by this. Wow. Yeah, that was but what I'm saying is that no matter the generation, I think urgent community support has kind of been in the DNA from the American Legion since day one, and that'll always be there. How we execute and operate programs remains to be seen. Some programs are certain to evolve, but as long as young people should try to learn and speak eloquently about the U.S. Constitution, I think that there's going to be an oratorical contest. As long as young people should aspire to understand the way democracy works, there's going to be boys' state and girls' state and boys' nation and girls' nation. I think that as long as young people should aspire to become law enforcement officers, there's going to be a junior law cadet law enforcement program that the American Legion can and does lead. And so there's a place for us in those programs. And we know very well that America has always promises to produce fewer disabled veterans and veterans going forward, but we always seem to produce quite a few, and there's always new needs, and VA needs advocates who are stakeholders. So as long as there are stakeholder advocates, as long as there's a VA, there's going to be a need for stakeholder advocates who literally are the voice of the customer, the consumer, the beneficiary of these VA healthcare facilities. That's going to be necessary. And I think that when we talk about our national security environment, the American Legion our national security division concentrates now on quality of life, service, and support for our troops, fighting for a strong national defense. All that is well and good. But remember what I said earlier, that the Americanism programs, our youth programs, our VA programs, our VA and our programs are all built on creating a stronger nation. And there is national security in that. If you're weak, you cannot fight. You cannot defend yourself. If your nation doesn't understand what they're fighting for, kids are growing up in poor health, poor physical condition. If they don't understand the value of what our freedom, justice, and democracy mean, you're going to have a problem in those nations. And it's already kind of fractured to a certain degree, I think. And we have an article coming up. I'm the editor of the American Legion magazine as well, but we have an article coming up in the April magazine on the lost study of civics in public schools, and I think that'll be an interesting. I'd be interested to see what the feedback is. Mark and I studied civics when we were kids, didn't you, Mark?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Ashley, did they have
very
civics?
Very briefly. I recall taking a general government class, maybe my sophomore year of high school. But what I think at that point in time, I would have appreciated more of like a finance civic, like collaborative course that kind of gave me a crash course to adulting. Like, 1, you're not going to figure it all out, right? You may not even figure it all out when you get in the military. 2, what's a loan? Like 3, how do you vote? How do you be an active and engaged citizen? And I think those were all those important things and those tangibles as we move forward in our lives. So I'm really excited to see where that goes because, yeah, I'm interested.
Well, we got a lot cooking right now, and I think this is a really exciting part of what we're working on in the American Legion is advanced preparation for people who are in service now, yet to discharge, in that 6-month window or 8-month window prior to discharge or separation, that we're helping facilitate programs for credentialing and licensing while still in the service, so that you come out ready-made. I did a big interview with the top army, the command sergeant major in last year, 2 years ago, and talked about the concept that how does industry wants military veterans to work. Industry has a lack of skilled workers, skilled trades. They want to trade. They want these people to come to work. And I think that the more we work to help veterans make that transition going forward, the better it's going to be.
All right, let's take our second commercial break here, and we will be back in just a moment.
100 Miles for Hope is back, and we're taking it to the next level. This year, you could choose over 40 different activities and track your progress on a handy mobile app. We have sweet swag to commemorate your journey, including tech shirts, baseball caps, hoodies, pins, patches, and challenge coins. All proceeds from these purchases support veterans and military families through the Veterans and Children Foundation. Head to legion.org/100miles to get started.
All right, so our 3-hour delay for technical difficulties has now resulted in an early break, but it's all good to go. We're piecing it together as we go through life. This would happen right as our numbers seem to be exploding on the podcast, so this is perfect for us. But Jeff Daly, you are back with us now, and you have Jeff Stoffer, editor of the American Legion magazine and history specialist, I guess, if you will. Hit him up.
That's why I dressed up, which for me
Nice.
means throwing a cheap jacket over a t-shirt.
Well, I actually have the elbow pads too, so I look a little scholastic myself.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you have a reputation as being all about history and things that happen. And I was going to ask about the new things, but as happens on this show, my questions get used before I can get to them. I was going to ask about the book on the shelf, but I'll just point out that you're keeping up with recording history now, not just talking about history that has already happened, and that's amazing. And I did appreciate the shout out for my post, but I will tell you that it was Culver City post 46 who is killing it with the blood drives, and I have to give them a shout out because they have been doing thousands of pints of blood, and I thought we were being awesome when we went up to doing it quarterly. They're doing multiples per week. They're really handling it. So my question to you, this was going to be a hard one for you because I also know that you can be very extemporaneous is the best way of putting it. One of the things when we're trying to tell the story of the Legion to new Legionnaires, or I'm sorry, prospective Legionnaires to be more precise, the biggest, most dreadful, awful question that ever comes up is, what do you guys do? Now, if somebody came up to you and said in exactly that voice, what do you guys do? What would Jeff Stoffer say to them?
I would say that we strengthen the nation and our national identity through responsible citizenship after service in the military and support our troops who are also eligible to be members. And I know that sounds pretty general, but if you think about it, it's all about, I always come back to this term, responsible citizenship after service. It's and it may be that your program might be in like the Department of Wyoming, that the important thing there was for the Department of Wyoming to create or lead and manage and support the high school rodeo program, the high school youth rodeo program, because it's a good program, teaches discipline, gets kids outside. And they needed the support. It might be something completely different. It might be, in American Legion basketball. I'm talking to a guy right now in Philadelphia, or I'm going to be talking to a guy in Philadelphia next week about kind of the resurrection of American Legion basketball, because that's the program that they think that can bring kids together. And when you got kids together working as a team in a positive way in wherever it might be, that's better than kids frayed and strayed and not, functioning in a team way. Well, Mark will remember this, but remember a few years ago when we had the kid, Mitchell Van Patten. He was the little guy from Meridian, Idaho, and he had won one of the categories in the junior shooting sports program. Yeah. And the kid couldn't have stood 5'1", and he couldn't have weighed over 100 pounds. But junior shooting sports, he got up there and he gave an absolutely wonderful speech about he can't play on the foot. He isn't going to be on the football team. He isn't going to be on the basketball team. But junior shooting sports gave him his place, gave him his identity, gave him a sense of pride. That's responsible citizenship when a veteran comes into the community and says, that kid also needs someplace to go. I remember I did a story a long time ago about the Legion in Eugene, Oregon, ran the local after-school chess club. That chess club went on and won, big national awards. It was a very competitive program for a while. So the program can be kind of what you want it to be, as long as it builds community, abides by patriotic values. I've exceeded my elevator pitch that you should give to a young person.
Well, I was going to say that seems to be the challenge. Because the American Legion does so many things. The first thing I say to somebody when they go, what do you all do? I go, well, first of all, how much time do you have?
Right.
Because we do so many things. Yep. And to extrapolate from we do so many things, we probably do something that you're passionate about. So why don't you start and tell me what you're passionate about, and I'll see where we can link. You know what I mean? So it's a big challenge, and I'm going to be looking to you for leadership.
Well,
communication.
One key aspect of this, and I hear this a lot, that all of our new programs are, in a sense, memorials to those who fought and fell before us. that's why, the number one value when you look at the we've done psychological studies on the American Legion member. What is the most important thing to that member? And I want to be remembered for my service, and more than that, I want everyone to remember those who served before me. And you know how it is. They honestly don't care if it was the Revolutionary War or Afghanistan. They all deserve honor, remembrance, and we have to respect. And all of the programs that the American Legion drives forward are in remembrance of them, because they didn't get to live in that world. That's why our posts are named for those who fell fighting.
Wow, thank you for that. And I will try to incorporate that into my elevator speech. And I mean while riding the elevator, not while constructing it. Because it's a different time frame.
You literally could do an elevator speech for each pillar of the American Legion. That's the thing. And I've tried to put like little and I've done it before, and I've got little bullet points on like Americanism, honor and remembrance, national security, veterans and youth, but it's a challenge. It's a sprawling organization which touches a lot of pieces of America.
If I could, I would say really quickly that anytime, especially being a younger veteran post 9/11 who recently just got out, folks ask me all the time, and the American Legion really provided a sense of second service and helped me really figure out my passion in a place that I was supported. And I think that's very commonplace in the military, and it's a nice thing to have when you're exiting, in that transition, and as you continue with whatever that second service is and the thing that you love. And a lot of that comes back to the value of selfless service and, civic responsibility and community. So I just want to put that in there because I think it's important, and that's something that's, I think, very frequently asked of, and for all the listeners out there who have ever been asked that question, think about really it has to come from the heart, why you're there, and communicating that is another thing, right?
I think that's the thing that I have missed most during COVID is I am not able to go out to the posts that I used to go to. And I think that has always been the source of my inspiration, is going to local posts, from Plattsburgh to LA, from Townsend, Montana, where I'm a member of the squadron there, the SAL squadron, to wherever, all across the country, Louisiana. You go in there, and no matter where you go, there's always this sense of what you said, passion about doing something meaningful that falls within our identity as an organization. And no one else does what we do, because no one else could get their arms around this sprawling identity, But it's a unique. Jeff brings up a great question, and that question has been asked many times. Maybe if we were narrower in focus, we would be less appealing to a broader landscape of people. There was a guy in Nevada, a Legionnaire in Nevada, who made it his charge to start a program, and I was thinking of him an individual obligation to community, state, and nation. But his individual obligation was he had learned about children of low-income families who couldn't afford to get hearing aids, who had bad hearing and needed hearing aids. And so he created a department-wide program, and he was the department program leader and soldier altogether. He did it, but he provided hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of funding to get children of low-income families hearing aids so that they could hear in school. And I thought that's how he took his mission in the American Legion, to make his country stronger through community service. That kind of thing makes a country stronger. People don't realize how many swimming pools and tracks and amphitheaters the American Legion built between 1925 and 1940. I don't know if you've been following on the website, I've got our World War II story, and I profiled one in Florida that it's no longer, it's still called Legion Pool. I'm sorry, it's in Georgia, Athens, Georgia, but it's still called Legion Pool, but that's the only real Legion association with it. But at the time, it was the biggest, most deluxe pool in the South. And it was built by the American Legion post, and it was a big deal. And we trained World War II soldiers to come in there and swim. And they got their they also used it for recreational purposes. But that was the most deluxe pool in the South. It was one of the largest in the South, most newest. They almost tore it out, And then there was this big uprising saying you can't tear out Legion Pool that was built in like 1939 or 40. Said we got to replace it, and it was like a huge cost to replace it. They kept it, and now and the students and the faculty at Georgia love it, and it's very important to them. And there's little pieces of that American Legion lore, I call it, and identity that all across the country that is so important and can be lost to history if we don't remember that this stuff came about because of the American Legion, or, in honor of veterans in service. Too often what the American Legion does is done when no one is watching, and we are not very good, or maybe somewhat reticent for good reasons, at casting a spotlight on the things that our people and our members do. Some of it's private, some of it's among veterans. Some of it's between a veteran and a disabled veteran, or between a veteran and a disabled child. But whatever it might be, that work is not something you necessarily say, look at what I did. It said, I'm glad I could help. That's what a soldier says. That's what a Marine says. That's what a sailor says. That's what a veteran says. That's what I've come to understand. Look what I can help. I don't need the spotlight. And it's a good thing, and it's a bad thing for our brand if we're talking about branding. But if you're talking about real soulful identity, I don't think that's going to go away in the 21st century or in the second century of the American Legion. That's organic among people who serve, in my opinion. And I think how it evolves is up to this generation.
So we're running a little long, but I do want to throw a caveat in here. The man so eloquently espousing the responsible citizenry just happens to be the same guy who sent me to Cuba in the middle of the summer, Africa in the middle of the mosquito season and malaria. You sent me to the North Pole in February. You sent me to Afghanistan. You sent me to Afghanistan in the middle of the fighting season.
You did not get hit.
You told me that the only way I would get a good evaluation is if I came back with a count. So I'm having a hard time reconciling this. I love you. The American Legion, in addition to being on the forefront of many of the things you've talked about, has also, we're coming out of African American History Month, Black History Month. We're moving into Women's History Month. We've also been at the forefront of a lot of social revolutions. The American Legion allowed African Americans to vote long before there was any, issue with Jim Crow laws or anything else. Can you just briefly talk to some of those, how while we're viewed in a conservative manner, we're conservative but not in a political sense, but when you talk about us in a social sense, we're way ahead of the times, or we have been historically. Can you talk to that briefly?
It was a very early principle that I think Theodore Roosevelt Jr., and I say this, but I know that there were many more. Hamilton Fish, of course. Hamilton Fish had been the commanding colonel, is that right, of the 369th Harlem Hellfighters in World War I. Hamilton Fish, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., these guys, and they were Democrats and Republicans. Henry Lindsley from Dallas was a Democrat. Eric Fisher Wood was this architect who had been in. They all were very adamant that a veteran is a veteran, male or female, regardless of skin color or ethnicity. And in fact, one of the things that I'm going to pull out for a historical piece was that they were so pleased and impressed and loved Native American soldiers in World War I, who, of course, there were Native American code talkers in World War I, and there were lots of scouts. The Native American military veterans were, at that time, if Native Americans were not allowed U.S. citizenship. I think it wasn't until like 1925 that they got U.S. citizenship. The American Legion demanded that they get U.S. citizenship in 1919, based if they had served in the military. Again, it was and women were able to serve as post commanders, and there were women's posts. There were many women's posts in the state of New York, the Department of New York, for instance, in 1919, all women's posts. So there were women post commanders in leadership roles. We had women as serving as leadership out of California. There's a woman, and I'd love to get more on her. I'll try to find her name. But she spoke, and she went to the National Convention in 1919 and demanded that the American Legion establish a formal program to provide training for disabled World War I veterans so that they could go into vocational training. It was a vocational training program. She brought that vocational training program and got given the podium to speak before our very first VA and R team, if you will, about how we established that. And she was from San Francisco, and nurses, soldiers, wax. You brought up waves and wax earlier, and one of my and I think that while it took a while for the American Legion to sort of establish, redefine itself, maybe up until 2017 when Denise Rowan from Wisconsin was elected national commander. I think that was an important shift and an important point in the history. But I will also, when it comes to race, the American Legion had African American, traditionally black posts. It wasn't all the national said, oh, everybody, you have to open everybody's. There were segregation laws in states. It was segregated South. It was segregated a lot of places. There was not fairness in this way. But they were going to say, you can be a member of the American Legion. You just have to abide by your state policies, whatever. And that's how we established what we call traditionally black posts. And some of those traditionally black posts in the South and stuff, or wherever, they're all over the country. Some of them do some of the most important work that the American Legion is doing today, and I'll bring up one right now that's very relevant to the COVID operations book. I have a whole chapter given to it. Is Post 65 in South Phoenix. Post 65 in South Phoenix has been unbelievable, and it's largely African American Hispanic community, but black veterans, male and female, a big, very strong American Legion family. They're making a point to their whole business was we're gonna make our zip code better. We're gonna make, and that sounds to me like I'm a veteran. I'm gonna make my community stronger, and they became one of the very first posts to conduct and lead COVID testing programs through their post. They were phenomenal in the delivery of food for folks who didn't have food or were isolated in their community. They created that environment. They fed people. They tested them for COVID. I think they were in line now to become a vaccination venue. That's one of the new things that's going on right now, is some of these posts are morphing into vaccination clinics where they're overrun. But the bottom line is, like I say, some of these posts that were started up and they became traditionally black or traditionally Hispanic. There's one in South Central on Cesar Chavez. I don't know, Jeff, if you know that post, but it's a traditionally Latin American Hispanic post, and it's a fantastic post. They do wonderful things. So and while today they're more diverse, they tend to support and provide a beacon of support in their communities, and I think that's an important value to the American Legion, and that's something that was professed in 1919 when they met in St. Louis for the first caucus. We had 25 black veterans who were part of the St. Louis caucus that wrote the preamble to the American Legion Constitution, and that's, I think, important and relevant considering that time.
Yeah. Jeff, couldn't appreciate it more, buddy. I love to see you. And hopefully when all this is over, even though the bulk of the establishments where we might have enjoyed adult beverages in the past have now closed permanently, I'm certain that you and I can find a place to catch up. And since I no longer work for you, you can't send me to the North Pole. So my wife will be happy with that and give me less trouble on that issue anyway. But Jeff, could not appreciate you being here any more than I really do. I think you're an incredibly eloquent spokesperson for the American Legion and what we do. And I think Jeff Daly hit you with the hardest question that all of us get asked. What does the American Legion do?
How long you got?
We've talked about it for an hour now, and I was ticking off the things in my head that I want to talk to you about. There's some posts like China Post 1 and the Paris Post that have not just seen history in the sense that they've had people passing. China Post 1 got overrun in World War II. Literally overrun. Like, the post commander, I believe, was killed in World War II trying to defend the post and get documents out. There's a million things like this. So for people out there that are in the Legion and you want to delve deeper, please, by all means, contact us. We'll get you that information. But not to drag it out anymore, because super producer Holly's already going to be mad at us. But Jeff, thank you so much for being here. Ashley, Jeff, always great to see you. And everyone else who's listening, we appreciate you. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you get out there and give us a rating, preferably the 5 stars. Leave us a review. Contact us any chance you get. Tango Alpha Lima at legion.org. Everyone else, we will see you next week. Call Jeff. Bye.
Bye.